This camera came out of nowhere. I believe most of us have never even heard of an XM lineup from Fuji before, but there actually was a single XM1 released all the way back in June 2013. Now, I wasn't aware of it because I was still simping over the 5D Mark III back in 2013, but a few months later that year, Fuji released the XA1, which looked exactly like the XM1, and we never heard from the XM series again. That went on for a few years, till the XA7, and then we haven't heard from the XA line since. But surprise! X-M5, today. This now takes its place as the entry-level X series camera. It follows the same formula as the XS20, pairing the 4th generation 26MP X-Trans sensor to the latest 5th generation X processor. So unsurprisingly specs-wise, this is in most ways on par with the XS20, which for an entry-level model is actually incredibly capable. That's 8 frames per second mechanical shutter, 4K 30p uncropped, 4K 60p with a 1.18 crop, and 6.2K open gate up to 30p. One crucial thing, however, which unfortunately puts this at quite a disadvantage over the XS20, is the lack of IBIS in the XM5. There is no workaround for that in stills, though in video, Fuji has made up for it by introducing their most powerful digital image stabilization to date. I've given it a try, and it does work really well. Though for it to work well, it does come with a hefty crop. That's 1.32 times if you're applying it to a full sensor readout, which means if you apply it in 4K 60p, which is already cropped, you'd be looking at a 1.44 crop factor with DIS. Also, like all electronic image stabilizations, they work best at faster shutter speeds. Motion blur artifacts are simply unavoidable with longer exposures. And one last note, DIS is not available in 6.2K open gate. But speaking of that, Fuji did leverage that open gate for a new 9:16 mode. In this mode, you're basically shooting vertical video while keeping the camera horizontal. At least with OpenGate, we're making use of the sensor's full height, so it's a slightly more sensible usage of the frame. Now, this may sound at first like a completely unnecessary feature, because why wouldn't you just rotate the camera 90 degrees to film vertical video? I'd say this mainly comes into play when it's more inconvenient to mount the camera vertically. For example, if you don't have an L bracket for it to go vertically on a tripod, or your gimbal doesn't have a vertical mode, this lets you do vertical while physically staying horizontal. Videos recorded in the 9:16 mode are Full HD, 1080 by 1920 up to 30 frames per second. Notably, if you don't use this feature and just roll 6.2K in 3:2, you'd be getting 4160 pixels vertically if you choose to crop it yourself in post. Though unfortunately, I don't think there's any 9:16 frame guides built into the XM5, and as I mentioned, you do lose DIS in 6.2K mode. In the 1080 9:16 mode, DIS is available. Fuji's also introducing beamforming mics in the XM5, so a feature similar to what we've seen in Sony's ZV cameras. You can now choose different pickup patterns for the internal microphone. So here's how the inbuilt microphones on the Fujifilm X-M5 sound like in an outdoor setting. So right now I have it set up to pick up sounds only from the front of the camera, so if I were to get behind the camera, I should sound a bit muffled since it's rejecting sounds coming from the back. Fortunately, if you happen to be filming in vlog mode and vlog mode only, you can use the touchscreen to change the microphone direction settings. So now I've set it to pick up from the front and back so you can hear me clearly from behind the camera, and if I were to get in front of the camera again, you should be able to hear my audio just fine. If you were to plug an external mic in though, the mic jack is on the back of the camera. It's quite unusual and borderline unsightly, but it actually makes quite a bit of sense because then it will never get in the way of the articulating LCD screen. In fact, there are no ports on the left edge of the camera, so the screen will always be able to move unhindered. Interestingly, you do get a headphone jack along with a micro HDMI and Type-C port on the grip side of the camera, though if you've got any of these plugged in, it does render the grip ungrippable. The absolutely tiny form factor of the XM5 is certainly its strongest appeal. Fuji is marketing this as an everyday carry camera, and at just over 350 grams for the body, this was for me one of the most effortless cameras to move around with. assuming you don't throw some giant lens on it. The majority of the build is plastic, though at the very least it's well-built plastic in the sense that moving parts don't feel loose and flimsy. Both SD card and W126S battery slot is on the bottom of the camera. Over on the top of the camera, it's really neat that Fuji still gives us both front and rear dials on such a small body. In addition to the mode dial, we also have the same film simulation dial we saw earlier on the X-T50. This gets all 20 current film simulations up to Real Ace. One satisfying design detail is how the hot shoe is perfectly aligned with the lens mount, and the mode and film simulation dials are exactly equidistant from the hot shoe. Though there are also some not so satisfying hardware decisions, like the placement of the Q button on the X-M5. This takes the cake for the least accessible Q button I've ever encountered on any Fuji. It's not only recessed between two dials, it is also completely invisible from the back of the camera. When I first saw the camera, I sat there for a good minute wondering why would they remove the Q button. Turns out it was right here on the top plate. There is also no dedicated button or switch for toggling your autofocus modes. You can also see that there is no EVF, and unlike the XA cameras, the X-M5 does not have a built-in flash. Though I wasn't expecting Fuji to actually make this compatible with the Fan 001 accessory. Well, here we are. The back of this had barely enough area to accommodate it. I suppose when you record 6.2K or 4K 60p in such a small body, overheating is a valid concern. Though I tested this without the fan in the sun doing 4K 60p, it honestly went on longer than I expected it to. 22 minutes and 40 seconds before it shuts itself off due to heat, and this is without the fan. So unless you plan on doing takes longer than that, you're probably fine without the fan. One final thing I wish to note about this concerns continuous shooting in stills. The buffer size is not particularly big, so if you're shooting uncompressed raw photos, it's about 25 shots before the buffer fills. Though if you're doing lossless compressed RAWs, you can keep going without much worry. It's also not able to take advantage of UHS 2 card speeds. This is a UHS 1 card slot. Though shy of demanding professional use cases, I don't really see that to be a limiting factor for such a casually oriented camera. I'll end this quick review with a few photos I shot with the X-M5 on the streets of Bangkok. Really happy with the film simulation dial, and I paired it with the version 2 16-55 f2.8 lens, which has been announced alongside the X-M5. I'll be sharing my quick thoughts on this lens over on my Instagram as well as YouTube Shorts, so I guess I'll see you around.